Punkt 23 Uhr und damit willkommen zu einer weiteren Ausgabe von Giga The Show.
Padam, padam. Mit tollen Themen und atemberaubenden News, die wir für euch gesammelt haben rund um die Welt der Videospiele. Und da gibt es ja ein Ereignis, das seine Spiele vorauswirft, wenn man so will.
Fantastic Five, quasi eine, ja, wie sagt man dazu? Ein
Event?
Ein Event im Neudeutsch von Ubisoft, die ja einige heiße Eisen im Feuer haben und wir waren vor Ort.
Das ist richtig. Und da gab es einiges zu sehen. Prince of Persia zum Beispiel, Tom Clancy's End War und natürlich auch Far Cry 2, das ja immer noch, wo die Rechte immer noch bei Ubisoft liegen und die ganz offensichtlich mit einem richtig guten zweiten Teil aufwarten werden können, wenn es dann rauskommt. Und wir haben schon mal vorab für euch ein paar Impressionen aus Afrika. Schaut euch das mal an.
My name is Patrick Redding. I work for Ubisoft Montreal. I'm the narrative designer on Far Cry 2. Well, I mean, in the last 4 weeks, I mean, you're effectively done. You've locked your content, and you're not adding any real new data to the game. Mainly, what we're doing is we're compiling feedback that we receive from our testers at various locations around the world, as well as taking our notes from our guiding hand in Paris, and we're sort of trying to pick what we consider to be the single most important little details that we feel is going to help add that extra bit of polish to the game. There's not a lot. I mean, mostly what you're going to see is a slight tightening up and tuning up of the AI behavior. So in combat in particular, you might notice that the AI just seems a little bit more reactive and a little bit more on the ball. And the weapon tuning, of course, is something that we're kind of engaging in to just sort of make sure that all the weapons feel balanced, but that they feel good, that they feel visceral, that they each have kind of a bit of a unique character to them. And all of those kinds of little details are brought together as part of the overall difficulty progression of the game. We want to make sure that the challenge of the game is really nicely distributed between the kind of 4 difficulty levels that the game ships with. We have a kind of a casual mode, a normal mode for typical players, a hardcore mode for people who are feeling a little more ambitious, and then an infamous mode for the people who really want to test themselves against the game. So it's important that the progression of weapons, the progression of AI behavior feels good, and it doesn't feel cheap, and it doesn't feel like we're cheating when we want to make the game more difficult. So those are the kinds of things that we really try to fine-tune in the last few weeks. A major selling point for us for Far Cry 2 is the idea that the player is always free to tackle his objectives any way he wants to. And that runs the gamut from saying, well, I want to play aggressively or I want to play more stealthily or more tactically, down to do I want to use vehicles or do I want to come in on foot? What kinds of weapons do I want to use? Another part of that is because our game has a 24-hour day-night cycle, the player has the ability to say, this is a target that I think would be more interesting to hit at night or at daytime. Now, what are the main differences? Well, obviously, the AI's behavior is going to be slightly different at night. They don't have the range, the sensory range, to be able to detect the player, quite so far away. They're going to be, as well, in their idle behavior, more likely to be a little more compact. Their range won't be quite as big. They'll be tending to do different kinds of activities in the evening as you would expect them to. I mean, they're mercenaries. They've got jobs to do, but they also have to get sleep. They have to eat. They'll socialize with each other, but maybe not quite as much at night. So it's a logical kind of difference. It's what you would expect it to be if you were to come to a location in the nighttime instead of in the daytime. I mean, one of the things to bear in mind about fire effects for us is that because all of our vegetation is sort of procedurally generated and is all rigged with real physics, real destructibility, and can be burned, because the weather can cause the wind to blow. I mean, in theory, if we were to turn our fire effects loose, and we've done this, I mean, we've certainly done it, during development on our test machines. If we want to, we could consume an entire map worth of savanna in a giant brush fire. The reality is, it's not that much fun for the player. I mean, it can be sort of satisfying to sort of watch an entire landscape burn. But the reality is that when it comes to sort of, being able to use that landscape and to maneuver through it and to drive through it and to get into a fight in the middle of it, having a giant raging brush fire that consumes the entire environment isn't as much fun as it sounds. The other problem, of course, is that, just from a pure technical perspective, the bigger the raging fire, the more likely you're going to start to run into frame rate issues. And so like any other game, we do have our technical limitations. We can't allow the player to destroy the entire landscape, and we also have to make sure we can render whatever's going to happen on screen and have it not affect the frame rate in a really detrimental way. That's especially important in multiplayer because, of course, we give the player full access to flammability, to flamethrowers, to Molotovs, to all of the things that can burn in the single-player game. those things are also available in multiplayer, and that becomes a much more pressing issue. If you've got 16 players, all fighting each other, you really don't want to have a frame rate hit. So yeah, there are limitations. The fire will spread out to a pretty decent range. Usually, it can consume most of the structures in a particular camp or a particular checkpoint. Lots of the trees will catch on fire, but we do have to stop it at some point. Obviously, streaming, any kind of optimization that takes place in the last few weeks is going to have to take into account the fact that we're streaming big chunks of the game world around the player as the player moves in to new sections of the world. And a factor there is that we wanted to make sure it was possible for a player who's moving continuously through that world to not have to experience any loads. The only exceptions to that is if the player uses the fast travel system, as you mentioned, and takes a bus from one part of the game world to another part, right away, then obviously we're jumping from one section to another, there's going to be a load. If the player gets killed and we have to reload a previous save game, there's going to be a bit of a load. So in situations like that, we've been able to optimize things a bit in order to get to the point where we're submitting the game to the different platforms. So you should notice some improvements. It may not be significant all the time, but I think you're definitely going to notice it in the case of the buses. Our weather system is totally dynamic and it's completely procedural. So you can't predict the weather just like you can't predict the weather in real life. But I mean, it's definitely true that if a certain amount of time passes, statistically, you are going to see bad weather at some point. It was funny actually. Just yesterday, I had someone come in and I was demoing the game, and they were asking about that. Like, oh, can you show me rain? I was like, well, I can't really force rain to happen, but if I go and I fast forward time, maybe a few hours, you may be more likely to see the weather change. The second I said that, it immediately started to rain. It was just a kind of random fluke that it worked out. So, I mean, I promise you will definitely see variations in weather. Sometimes you might walk out of a safe house after advancing time, say from nighttime to morning, and see a full-on rainstorm going on. Another time you might do it and the sky will be completely clear and you'll see the sun coming up. So it really is dynamic and it really is unpredictable. I mean, it's a logical and obvious question. People want to know, like, what are the differences going to be between the different platforms, especially between PS3 and Xbox 360. The reality is that if you were to look at the game running on the 360 and then the next day look at it on the PS3, you probably wouldn't notice significant differences. If you were to look at them side by side, you might notice a few subtle differences graphically. In terms of frame rate, it's very consistent. Obviously, the game is the same on both platforms. The content is the same. The missions are the same. All of that stuff is the same. So really, anything that you're going to notice is going to be pretty subtle. Maybe slightly different shadowing on the PS3, slightly different texture rendering on the 360, but again, very small. We certainly, we have a huge amount of respect for Crysis. The guys at Crytek are amazing, and they've done an incredible job with Crysis. It looks beautiful. The emphasis of the games is slightly different, though. While they're both shooters and they're both sort of graphically intensive, and we've put a lot of effort, both of us, into rendering outdoor environments. For us, the main focus is that it's an open world game. It's 50 square kilometers, several different environment types, several different terrain types, from savanna to jungle to river to what have you, and the ability to move freely around, all the time with dynamic weather and dynamic day-night cycle. For us, that means we had to focus on slightly different graphic problems than what the guys on Crysis did. So you're definitely going to notice places where maybe they've got, slightly stronger execution, and you're going to notice places where we've got a stronger execution as well. It's really hard to do a side-by-side comparison for me. Frankly, I haven't put the time in myself to do it, but I think you're going to notice a few areas where we're a little bit stronger.
Ja, zum Schluss ganz interessant natürlich das Erste, was einem einfällt, der direkte Vergleich zwischen Cryteks neuestem Werk Crysis, dem inoffiziellen Nachfolger zu Far Cry, was ja von Crytek ist, und Far Cry 2, dem offiziellen Nachfolger, weil die Rechte eben bei Ubisoft geblieben sind, als Crytek dann zu Electronic Arts gegangen ist. Er sagte gerade, die sind ziemlich auf einem Niveau. Es gibt gibt Ecken, wo das eine ein bisschen besser ist, aber er glaubt auch, dass Far Cry 2 die ein oder andere Ecke hat, wo sie eben doch ein bisschen besser sind.
Ja, ich meine, es wird dann immer diskutiert, das ist besser, das ist besser. Warum nimmt man nicht einfach hin, dass es eben zwei sehr gute Spiele sind? Umso besser.
Naja, gut, er hat die Frage ja gestellt bekommen.
Ja, gut, ich sag nur, ich meine jetzt eher gerichtet an die zahlreichen Ego-Shooter-Fans, oder es gibt ja immer wieder Leute, die sagen, boah, nee, ich bleib bei Crytek, also in dem Fall bei Crysis, oder nee, ich bleib Far Cry treu. Warum irgendwem treu bleiben, warum nicht einfach beide Spiele genießen?
Ist wie mit Frauen.
Exakt.
Und mit dem Newsflash, da gibt es auch jede Stunde einen anderen.
Apropos Far Cry 2, denn was Ubisoft nicht so sehr erfreuen will an dem neuen Titel ist, dass er bereits im Internet geleakt ist, genauso wie Fable 2 und Fallout 3. Mittlerweile wirklich 3 sehr namhafte Top-Titel für die Xbox 360, die vor dem Launch geleakt sind und komplett im Internet erhältlich sind. Und das ist wirklich ein richtig großes Problem, wo man sich überlegen muss, wohin das noch führt. Bislang war ja eher das Problem, dass die Spiele eben zusätzlich zum Verkauf noch downgeloadet werden, aber dass sie jetzt sogar schon vor dem offiziellen Start im Netz landen, das kennt man sonst eigentlich nur von der Musikindustrie. Und da muss man sich überlegen, wie kann das eigentlich sein, dass solche Spiele überhaupt schon mit kompletter Verpackung und teilweise sogar schon den Anleitungen im Netz sind. Wo sind da die undichten Stellen und wie kann man ihnen entgegenwirken? Wahrscheinlich bald mal ein Thema bei uns als Aufmacher, aber erstmal ist das natürlich eine News, die sehr nachdenklich stimmt.
Carl Johnson ist ein krasser Gangster und er treibt sich rum in San Andreas, genauer gesagt in GTA San Andreas. Das ist einer der vorherigen Teile zu GTA 4 und den könnt ihr euch alsbald auf dem Xbox Live Marktplatz runterladen. Ab Montag funktioniert das Ganze und es kostet 1200 Microsoft-Punkte, was gar nicht so viel ist, wie es sich anhört. Sind nämlich nur 14 €, also gar nicht so viel. Und 2000 Punkte, das ist so die Zahl, die man sich auch mal zum Beispiel im Games-Laden kaufen kann, muss dafür gar nicht unbedingt immer online sein, kosten 24 €, also kann man sagen, durchaus erschwinglich.
Roman Ladik ist Lead Artist für Mafia 2 und präsentiert jetzt in seinem Forum 2 neue Screenshots. Die gucken wir uns auch direkt mal an von Mafia 2. Die sehen nämlich wirklich sehr nett aus, lassen grafisch auf jeden Fall einiges verheißen. Und angeblich handelt es sich bei diesen Screenshots um die Game Engine, also tatsächlich um Ingame-Bilder. Das sei jetzt mal einfach so zitiert. Wenn es wirklich dann so kommt, können wir uns drauf freuen, würde ich mal sagen. Ne?
Wir freuen uns auf einen zweiten Teil zu Blitz the League. Das ist ein Football-Spiel der ganz besonderen Art aus dem Hause Midway. Und da gibt es jetzt einen brandneuen Trailer. Und der lässt euch schon mal ahnen, wie rasant es da zur Sache geht. Denn das ist wirklich kein normales simulastisches Footballspiel, sondern da brechen Knochen und da wird ins Fleisch geschnitten. Da ist es das Hauptziel, den Gegner zu verletzen, nicht unbedingt das Ei in die Endzone zu transportieren. Könnt ihr euch gerne mal anschauen. Macht sicher Lust auf mehr.
Spore ist trotz Kopierschutz Securom sehr, sehr erfolgreich. Wie wir jetzt erfahren haben, das ließ Electronic Arts Chef John Riccitello verlauten und er äußerte sich weiter über den Entrüstungssturm, den Spore vor allen Dingen in vielen Internetforen entgegenwirkte wegen Securom und äußerte sich dazu und sagte, nach Riccitello-Vermutungen seien die Hälfte der Beschwerden von Raubkopierern selbst gekommen und die andere Hälfte von Leuten, die das Kopierschutzsystem nicht verstanden haben. Und außerdem sagte er noch, ich zitiere, a minority of people that orchestrated a great PR program. They picked the highest profile game they could find. I respect them for the success of their movement. Also im Prinzip fast schon eine Verschwörungstheorie, dass die Leute einfach nur das erfolgreichste oder verheißungsvollste Spiel auf dem Markt sich rausgesucht haben und quasi im Internet öffentlich diffamieren wollten. In diesem Sinne kann man nur sagen, es ist ihnen nicht gelungen.
Ja, das ist vielleicht richtig. Was uns aber gelungen ist auch die nächsten 45 Minuten mit unglaublich atemberaubendem Programm zu füllen. Wir haben unter anderem für euch Tipps der Redaktion, aber wir wollen heute nicht sagen, welches Spiel das dann ist. Ne? Außerdem haben wir noch...
Ich weiß es aber.
Ja, natürlich.
Aber ich sag's nicht.
Ich weiß. Und dann haben wir noch Dead Space für die PlayStation 3. Ich glaube, das wird auf jeden Fall gruselig. Solltet ihr euch mal anschauen. Wir sehen uns nachher noch mal kurz wieder. Tschüss und auf Wiedersehen.